Hello everyone, back tuning into today's first video, doing the third spring 2020 update for today's third video. So I've done two updates for the spring so far this season. The first couple of updates have been focusing on autumn and also December data. We've got a little bit more for December to show you at the beginning of this video, to do a little bit of December pattern matching. But the main point of this video is actually going to be focusing on the QBO, and that being the second part of the video. We think that this spring is going to be a developing, strengthening, easterly QBO. So we're going to have a look at years that had developing and strengthening easterly QBOs and what those springs were like. So it gets much more serious in the second part of the video. The first part of the video is just really to have a little bit of a laugh and to just sort of see what the pattern was in December and see if we can find some similar Decembers and what those springs would have been like following those Decembers. All will become clear as we go along. So that's what we're doing for the first video. It's going to be quite a long video as always with the long range stuff, so you can't watch it all in one go. Then don't worry, you will be able to watch it on the website GWV.com and at the YouTube channel indefinitely. This video will be placed on the spring updates page with a written summary sometime this season, just going over everything that we discuss in video. It's going to be a busy old day at GWV today. We've got the Sunday Roundup coming up for you around or just after lunch. So GWV Sunday Roundup will be with you early this afternoon. Mid-afternoon, we're going to release the ECMWF, Metro France and DWD Season 1 update for this month for January 2020. And then tonight we're going to have Ensembles Watch. We'll go through all members of the GFS Ensembles and see what they're all showing for the next couple of weeks. Will there be any sign of any cold weather? You'll find out tonight. Big thank you to Analogues Guru James Ackrill, as always, and also big thank you to our good friend Richard Trott for the GIF. And I think that's everything that I'm going to tell you. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. As I say, the first part of the video is going to be looking at December's 500 millibar pattern. So this is how December 2019 looks in terms of the 500 millibar pattern. Very Atlantic driven, you'll notice. Low pressure dominating up to the north and the west of the country, high pressure down to our southwest. That's about as zonal as it gets, bringing those west-southwesterly winds and long fetch as well. Given the setup, it's surprised we didn't have a milder month than we did actually. We came away with CET in the fives. Of course, we looked at December's CET last week. But that's a very, very unsettled, zonal, Atlantic-driven December. And it's also mild on the other side of the Atlantic as well, because we have this ridge of high pressure sitting across central, northern and eastern parts of America. The cold weather really is in the northwestern part of Canada and the States, with this trough of low pressure just here. But over on the eastern and northern part of America, actually it's relatively mild there. So it's one of those situations where both sides of the Atlantic are relatively mild, to be honest. So the jet stream with this is doing something a little bit like that, which leaves both sides, our side and also the American side of the Atlantic, on the mild side. So I've been through all Decembers, going right way back to the 1830s, and I've tried to pick out the years I think have a similar match. You can never get a like-for-like match. Every single month, every single year is individual and unique unto itself. So you can only pick out the years that are possibly having similarities or other closest match. And this is the reason why the pattern matching that we do with these long range update doesn't actually go into the final finished forecast, because it's very subjective. And again, we're only picking out the years that we think have the closest similarity. But as it's subjective rather than fact, I mean, when we look at something like the QBO, then that is fact. When we look at something like the CET, then that is fact. When we look at something like ENSO, then that's fact. Although sometimes there's a bit of guesswork going on with ENSO when we do these long-range updates. So when we do a pattern matching, that's kind of like subjective and can't be proven, if you like. like. So that's why the pattern matches never go into the final finish forecast. Anyway, that is, let's get rid of this, and that is December 2019's pattern. So this is the first one that I thought had a bit of a similarity. Again, you never get a like-for-like match. This is December 1850, has the above-average heights across many southern, southwestern parts of Europe, perhaps a bit deeper with the low pressure in the Atlantic. But you can see that broadly we're going to be bringing in that west-southwesterly off the Atlantic. Over in America, the ridge is possibly stronger than we've had this year across eastern parts of America, but it's still there with the broad setup of the trough then being on the west coast of America. So there are differences, but broadly we've still got that idea going on here with December 1852 of mild on both sides of the Atlantic and low pressure driving into the UK and northern parts of Europe. What do you think about that? I think there's a similarity, but it's not a perfect match. I think there is a little bit of a similarity there. Let me know in the comments, by the way, which years you think are the closest match to December 2019. So that's December 1852. The next one that I picked out was December 1868. This one, again, has the above-average heights across southern parts of Europe. It has the below-average heights in the North Atlantic. It has a ridge a little bit further north this time. The ridge is more centred towards Canada, and possibly it's a little bit colder for eastern parts of America. Nevertheless, we're still doing something like that with the flare and with the jets. Of course, this December makes up part of the warmest winter on record, winter of 1868, 1869 for the CT, anyway, is the mildest winter on record. Unbelievable that still stands after all the mild winters that we've had, like since the 1990s. But there we go, winter of 1868, 1869 is still the mildest winter on record for the CT, and December 1868 makes up part of that. So again, I think you can see there is a bit of a similarity there. It definitely has that trough of low pressure bringing the colder air into the west coast of America, has the ridge more across northern, but also some eastern parts of America, low pressure in the Atlantic, high pressure across southern parts of Europe, and we're left in that southwesterly flow. That's December 1868. The next one I picked out was December 1891. So again, that's how this year looks in comparison to December 1891. So again, it's a similar sort of idea, a little bit deeper this time for a trough of low pressure across the west coast of America, but it's still there. That's where the cold air is digging in to that west coast. On the eastern side of America, it has the ridge of high pressure, has the low pressure in the North Atlantic, has the ridge from Spain and through the Med into eastern parts of Europe. We're bringing in a west-southwesterly Atlantic-driven type month. So again, I think you can see there's a bit of a similarity there between those two sort of setups and scenarios. Not a perfect match, but again, I think that's another reasonably close match in December 1891. A long gap then to December 1936. So this one, it's a little bit further north with the low pressure this time. Low pressure a little bit further north to the country, but again it has this ridge through the eastern part of America, extending through the Atlantic into, excuse me, a little bit further north with the ridge as well, into towards the south of the UK, and also into France. Then the ridge goes on up into eastern parts of Europe. There's the way the jet stream is going to be going in December 1936. So then again, another rather unsettled, mild and Atlantic-driven type month. The next one is December 1979. This one is very unsettled, perhaps a little bit more so even than December 2019, with the below average heights setting in from the Atlantic. It's got the above average heights from the Azores into southern parts of Europe. It also has a warm ridge over America, but this time the warm ridge is covering much of North America, and the trough of low pressure is backed out into the Pacific. So I'm less keen on that one on December 1979. But again, let me know in the comments which December you think is the closest. Then we've got December 1994. Now, I think this is a pretty decent match, actually, in a lot of ways, December 1994. So the trough of low pressure is about right on the west coast of America. We've got this ridge across northern and eastern parts of the states. That ridge extends across the Atlantic into much of southern and western Europe, and then goes northwards. Low pressure is around here, and we're bringing in those mild west-southwest. This is an unsettled month and a mild month too in December 1995. I mean, it's not a perfect match. Again, there are differences, but I think that's a pretty decent one. I think that's not too bad in December 1994. December 1998 is our next one. Less keen on this one because it has ridging over on the Pacific side of America, and that ridging just extends through America, really, with low pressure up to the north and the west. So the high pressure does extend in towards southern Europe. Again, we're left bringing in those west-southwesterly winds. I'm less keen, really, on December 1998. And then the last one is December 2015. And again, that's pretty decent for America, actually. So that's 2019, that's December 2015. So yes, we've got that cold trough on the Pacific side of America. We've got the warm ridge over on the Atlantic side of America and into North America too. There's the trough of low pressure out in the Atlantic. The position of the ridge across Europe is a little bit different. This time it's more centered over the Alps. And that's what dries up that exceptionally mild air from the southwest. So we know that December 2015 is the warmest December on record. It was a lot warmer, a lot milder than December 2019, and that's the reason that the alignment of the trough in the Atlantic, the trough, yes, of the Atlantic and the ridge across Europe, the alignment of those two factors draws up winds from the tropical Atlantic rather more. Nevertheless, I think there is again something of a similarity between December 2019 and December 2015. Again, please let me know in the comments which years you think are the closest match to this December. So this is how the springs following those December pattern matches come out. This is first of all spring 1853. This one has above average heights up over Greenland. It has a trough of low pressure on the eastern side of America, so it's cold there. And it has a trough of low pressure through much of central and southwestern Europe. So this is a colder pattern. We're doing something like that with the flow and with the jet stream. If you want to see how the jet comes out in America, I suppose it's going to be something a bit like that, isn't it? Something like that anyway. So anyway, that's how it just gets rather complicated when you start having to back the jet stream back into America as well. So let's see if we can just track that again, shall we? So we've got the blocking. Let's change the colour as well. That might help. So we've got the blocking area of high pressure up here and extending down into Canada. The jet stream, therefore, will be doing something not unlike that, I would have thought. Remember, the jet stream is going to go to the south of the troughs. So I think the jet stream will be doing something a little bit like that, probably, during the spring of 1853. Anyway, places both sides of the Atlantic and the Pacific on the cold side of the trough, interestingly. So on this Pacific side, I've gone off on a tangent here, haven't I? I've really set myself up for this. It places the west coast of America on the cold side of the trough, and also the east coast of the states here. So Pacific and Atlantic coasts are cold. And then for us, we're under this trough of low pressure just here. So it's a complicated pattern, but basically it's cold spring pattern for both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. The next spring is 1869. This follows the mildest winter on record. This one has blocking up to the north around Greenland and Iceland with low pressure through northern and western Europe. Again, with jet stream, I'm not going to include America, gets too complicated. With the jet stream, we're doing something like that. So this was like quite a cold spring in 1869, following the mildest winter on record. Spring was delayed in 1869 after an exceptionally mild record-breaking winter of 1868-1869. We have a cold spring. The next one is the spring of 1892. This one, again, with below average heights, low pressure to our south, above average heights, blocking up towards the north. Jet stream is shoved down there somewhere. So that looks like a pretty cool spring as well, probably bringing the wind from a north-northeasterly direction quite a lot of the time. This is indicative perhaps of the fact that when you have a very mild, certainly a very mild early part to winter, we can't say how all of these winters progressed on, but certainly it could be indicative that when you have a very mild start to winter, you can unleash winter conditions perhaps a little bit later on. We have that long gap then through to 1936, 1937. So this is how the spring of 1937 is looking. It has above average heights, high pressure up to our northeast, but essentially this is a very unsettled and Atlantic driven spring with low pressure heading in off the Atlantic Ocean. So this is an unsettled and wet spring in 1937. Another very long gap then through to 1979, 1980. So the spring of 1980 looks like this, and I think spring 1980 has showed up in some of our December data as well, interestingly, but we looked at last week, I think it did. So this one again with the above average heights to the north, the below average heights tending to be across central some parts of Europe. This looks like it's rather easterly spring. Remember, spring's a transitional season, so in March, easterlies can be quite cold. By May, easterlies are going to be relatively warm. I imagine that's quite a mild spring, but it's very easterly and potentially rather thundery, particularly for southern and southeastern parts of the country. The next spring is 1995, following that December pattern matching 1994, of course. This one has above average heights out in the Atlantic and going north, below average heights sitting to our east-northeast. Rather a cold spring this, or certainly the early part of spring 1995 was quite cold. March 1995 did include a couple of snow events. There was another cold snap around the middle of April 1995, but then it got really warm, and of course you had a tremendous heat wave through the first week of May 1995, which in retrospect was very much setting up the pattern of the summer of 1995, that incredibly hot and dry summer 1995. The next spring is 1999. This one has a shallow area of low pressure close to the UK and Western Europe, some higher pressure up to the north, but this is a very mild spring in 1999. It does have a cold snap in April, I think, of 1999, but otherwise that is a very mild spring. You probably wouldn't think that given the 500 millibar height anomaly that we had for that spring. And then the last spring is 2016, following the incredibly mild winter of 2015-2016. This one again displays a bit of a northern blocking signal, high pressure sitting up to the north, low pressure to the south. We did have a very cold spell during April of 2016, and not surprising given that level of blocking that it had to the north. So yes, there was cold weather in the spring of 2016, more so probably than in the winter of 2015-2016. Putting all of those pattern match years together then, this is how all Decembers combined, or Marches I should say combined, are coming out following those December pattern matches. It looks like it's quite an unsettled signal for the Marches, with low pressure sitting very close to the UK, a little bit to the south. There is something of a northern blocking signal. I'm not sure it's a tremendously cold setup, this due to the position of the block and the trough of low pressure. You could envisage some cold weather at times, perhaps, with these Marches, but I think more than that, the main thing is probably very unsettled for Western Europe. April has a much more anticyclonic signal, doesn't it? So in April, we find we have above average heights sort of over slightly to the west of the country, below average heights across eastern parts of Europe. That does look like a cold setup for Eastern Europe. So we go from a very unsettled March into potentially a much drier setup in April. And temperature probably with this just about on the cold side of that high pressure as well. So probably relatively cool, I would have thought, with those Aprils. But the main thing is that we go from very unsettled in March to much drier in April, and then in May we start to see signs of northern blocking beginning to appear, with below average heights coming in underneath it. Is that setting up a rather dodgy summer pattern? Well, who knows, but certainly it's that kind of thing where we would be bringing in a lot of easterly winds. Of course, May is our most easterly month of the year. So we will be bringing in a lot of easterly winds with that, but the trough of low pressure coming in underneath the block, undercutting it, if you see what I mean, that is a little bit of a concern. It means that some of those Mays are probably turning very wet and quite cold, with winds in from an easterly direction and a trough of low pressure undercutting. Maybe not a particularly good signal for all of the Mays combined. Putting all of those springs together, finally, this is how it looks following those December pattern matches. So below average heights over and to the east of the country, blocking up to the north. There is a northern blocking signal. Winds tending to be from the northeast. I mean, definitely you would say that on average you could expect quite a bit of cold weather, I think, during these springs. It isn't a plain sailing sort of smooth transition through the spring and into the summer. You will probably, based on that, expect quite a lot of throwbacks to winter type conditions following those December pattern matches, and you know, just potentially very unsettled and not particularly great. Out of the 3 months, it looks like April has the strongest anticyclonic signal, which is quite interesting. So very unsettled start to the springs, could be quite cool and wet late on, and then in the middle we possibly get something a little bit drier perhaps. Right, so that's the first part of the video done. I'm going to pause it there. We'll come back and then we'll talk about the main point of this third spring 2020 update, which of course is going to be the QBO, the quasi-biennial oscillation. So more about that in the second part of the video, but I'll see you very, very soon. Okay, we're back, and we're ready to resume the second part of the Spring 2020 update from GWV. So I hope you enjoyed the first part. We're doing a little bit of December pattern matching and having a look at some springs following those December pattern matches. That pretty much is the end of the December data now, I would have thought. I don't think there's anything else that we can talk about in terms of December 2019. Now we're going to talk about the QBO, this second part of the video, and this is the most important part of the video. This section will, of course, be forming part of the overall spring forecast as well, when we come to do that at the end of May. So we're going to be talking about the quasi-biennial oscillation. So let's get on with that right now for you. So this is from NOAA, and it's showing every month's QBO data, every month's QBO number. Ignore these top years. People ask me about this from 1948 to around 1952 or 1953. It looks like we're just in a continuous easterly QBO going on for years and years and years. I think that's actually just very unreliable, that part of the data. So reliably, the QBO index begins around 1952 to 1953, I think, or maybe 1953 to 1954. So what we're looking at, let's come down to the current year, to 2019, well, to last year. We haven't got 2020 up yet. So this is 2019. So what we're looking for is springs that are occurring with developing and strengthening easterly QBOs. Now, the QBO is a strengthening and weakening of the zonal flow, essentially. So, very complicated to explain the QBO, but at its most basic, the quasi-biennial oscillation is an index that's reflecting the strength of the zonal westerlies. When you're in a westerly QBO, and that's when you've got these positive numbers that we see just here. When you're in a westerly QBO, then the zonal westerlies are strengthened, and you're strengthening and powering up the zonal westerlies, if you like. When you've got these negative numbers, though, that's an easterly QBO. We had that for much of 2018. Easterly QBO is a weakening of the zonal westerlies. This is very cyclical and should be very reliable. So we wax and wane between these two phases of the easterly and the westerly QBO. And as I say, it should be very reliable. It should be like a pulse. It should be like a heartbeat. And occasionally it goes awry. That happened in 2016, of course, when we should have gone from Wesley to an easterly QBO there, and that failed, and then we saw the Wesley QBO taking off again. But that's very unusual that happened. Up to that point, we hadn't known that to happen since 1953 when we started recording the QBO. So the QBO should be very reliable, and for this spring, we should be heading off into a developing and strengthening easterly QBO. So let's come back to 2019. There we go, 2019 just there. These are our positive numbers through 2019 on a month-by-month basis, depicting the Wesley QBO that has dominated 2019. But you'll see in the final months how the Wesley QBO, how the number gradually reduces, so how Wesley QBO is weakening. And the last number that we have for December 2019 is that one, 1.66. So virtually now, or at December, we was virtually moving in towards the easterly QBO, and I would expect that either in January or possibly February we will get our first negative QBO number. And then through March, April and May, these three numbers just here, we should see those negative numbers going increasingly negative, if you see what I mean. So you can come up to 2017 and you see how the Wesley QBO in the first months of 2017 then weaken and quickly moving to a negative phase in the second half of 2017. And notice how those negative numbers get more and more negative as the months go on. That's the kind of thing we're expecting to happen for the spring of 2020. So it should be a developing and strengthening easterly QBO spring. So this happened in past years, and we'll talk about those springs in a moment. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. So let's scroll up to 1970. So that's 1970 just there. This is the year of 1969. So 1969 begins with an easterly QBO, but it reverses into the Wesley QBO through most, that Wesley QBO carries on through most of 1969. And then in January and February of 1970, we begin to reverse that Wesley QBO into the easterly phase of the QBO. So this is March 1970, this is April 1970, this is May 1970. And notice how those numbers are becoming more negative as we're going through March, April and May, the spring of 1970. Through that spring, we're seeing the easterly QBO getting stronger. And so that is one of the years that we're going to be looking at in a moment, the spring of 1970, which had a developing and strengthening easterly QBO. Another one, a more recent one that I can show you is going to be, let's do 2005. So this is the year of 2004, and this is the year of 2005. So 2004 begins, very first month of 2004 has an easterly QBO. February 2004 sees a reversal into Wesley QBO. That carries on right the way through through the rest of 2004. The first easterly QBO month of that period is January 2005, which is only very slightly negative, and only very slightly negative in February and March of 2005 as well. So that was a long sort of movement from the Wesley to the easterly QBO. Maybe similar actually to what's going on this winter, which is taking quite a while to get into the easterly QBO phase. But by April and May, we see a definite powering up of the easterly QBO, definite strengthening and development of that easterly QBO through April and May 2005. And so therefore that, again, 2005, spring 2005 is another year that we're going to be seeing in the analogues in a moment. There's a couple of years that I had to exclude, unfortunately. So I'm going to take up to 1962. This is 1962 just here. So 1961 begins the first couple of months still in the easterly QBO. Then the rest of 1961 is a relatively weak westerly QBO. And that carries on into, that Wesley QBO carries on into the first couple of months of 1962. This is March 1962 at plus 5.26, so that's definite westerly QBO still. April shows a weakening in 1962, but it's still westerly at plus 2.04. And it's not until May that we finally go into the easterly QBO in 1962 at minus 3.67. And then the rest of 1962, the summer and the autumn, and even in the winter of 62, 63, that's all strong easterly QBO stuff. But I've had to keep 1962 out because I think really that rather than being a rather than being a strengthening and developing easterly QBO, that's like a transitional spring. It's transitioning from the west to the easterly phase of QBO. And I think for this spring will be a little bit further on than that. But it did come close. I-62 did come close to being included within this Analogues package. Anyway, I hope that explains what we're doing. So, the first developing, strengthening easterly QBO spring is 1954. It's how the spring of 1954 is looking, and quite a lot of blocking in this spring, with above average height sitting to the north of us and below average height sitting to the south of us in this developing and strengthening easterly QBO spring. You will envisage a lot of easterly winds. Now, some of this could be a carryover from the winter, because, of course, we know what happened in the winter of 53, 54 is that it was very mild through the first half of the winter, but it became a lot colder in February of 1954, and that probably carries on to some degree into the spring. Whether that is partly at least easterly QBO related, who can say? But anyway, that is how the developing easterly QBO spring of 1954 is looking. The next spring is 1956. Again, this is a developing easterly QBO spring. So through the spring months, the easterly QBO is getting stronger and powering up. This one has above average heights pretty much centered over top of the country. It's rather a bizarre pattern. Lots of low pressure out to the North Atlantic and also to the south of us. So a reasonable amount of dry weather through the spring of 1956, I think, following the severely cold February, of course, of 1956. The next spring is 1960. This one's rather a dry spring. It has a lot of high pressure over Scandinavia, so quite an easterly spring. And I think there's a reasonable amount of dry and quite warm weather through the spring of 1960. That's a very nice one to see within the Analogues package. The next spring is the one we just looked at within the QBO table, and that is the spring of 1970. This one has a mid-Atlantic ridge going up towards the south of Greenland, with below average heights sitting to our east. And of course, this is going to be pulling in northerly winds. So this is a cold spring, particularly so in March. March of 1970 has some tremendous snowstorms, especially in the opening days of March 1970. Really, really cold and really snowy. And the rest of the spring is pretty chilly as well, to say the least, in 1970. But it is a good summer. The next developing easterly QBO spring is 1972. This one's more unsettled, with below average heights from the Atlantic into the north of Europe. A very weak area of high pressure up to our northeast. But the main thing with this one is that it looks very unsettled. Quite a lot of rain, I would have thought, in the spring of 1972. Spring 1974 is our next one. This looks like it's a drier spring with higher pressure up to the north, somewhere close to Norway, and bringing in quite a lot of easterly winds. Of course, spring is the most easterly season of all seasons, so this one has a lot of easterly winds and a fair amount of dry weather as well in the spring of 1974. Spring 1975 is cold and unsettled. A lot of that is probably a carryover from the winter of discontent. Winter of 78, 79 is a severely cold, well, very cold, and at times quite severe and snowy winter. Has a wind coming in from the north and the northeast a lot of time through this spring, so there are many cold snaps occurring through the spring of 1979. Very, very delayed cold spring indeed in the developing ECQBO of 1979. Then quite a long gap through to spring 1998. So this one with above average heights out to the west of the country, below average heights to the east of us. It's a funny old spring. It has a very cold and wet April after a relatively mild March, and then May turns really warm. We have summer in May, and then the rest of the summer is very, very forgettable. And of course, as I say, it has a very cold and very wet April in 1998. The next one is 2003. Again, this is another pretty decent one to have within the Analogues package for a developing easterly QBO during the spring. This one with lots of high pressure sitting over to the east of the country, below average heights out to the west. There's jet stream and wind direction type flow. And so this is a dry and warm spring in 2003, very much setting up the pattern of that hot summer of 2003. And then we've got 2005. So this one, the spring of 2005, is quite unsettled. Below average heights coming in from the Atlantic. It does have a blocking signal, and there's a very cold start to March 2005. The first half of March 2005 is very cold and quite wintry. Then it gets much, much milder in the second half of March 2005. The rest of the spring is relatively mild, but it is a bit mixed, and there's not much in the way of dry and warm weather during the spring of 2005. And then the last time we had a developing / strengthening easterly QBO during the spring was in 2007. It's a little bit of a worry for this to be showing up, actually, because although the spring itself was very anticyclonic, or certainly March and April anyway, were very anticyclonic, warm, dry, high pressure dominated, the low pressure that we have penned in around Greenland and Iceland is a little bit of a warning sign of what happens later on as we get through to May. There's a complete flip around. This blocking goes north, this high pressure goes north and forms northern blocking. The trough of low pressure gets pushed south, and May 2007 turns into a very cold and wet month, and that deluge then continues through the summer of 2007. So that's a little bit of a worrying one to see in the Analogues package, given the last time we had a developing easterly QBO during the spring was in 2007. Putting all of that together then, this is how developing easterly QBOs come out when we combine all marches. So we tend to have a lot of high pressure, don't we, over Scandinavia in these marches, with low pressure tending to be pushed quite a long way to our south. These marches could be quite cold, you know. Could we bring in easterly winds? I say spring's a transitional season, so in March, and easterly is going to be pretty cold and grim. In May, and easterly is going to be quite warm away from the east coast. So that could be quite a dry signal, maybe, for the marches with a developing easterly QBO, but potentially quite cold with a lot of easterly winds. April, I should say, doesn't look all that good either. It tends to have below average heights across northern, central and southern parts of Europe, and it tends to be moving the high pressure towards Iceland. So these Aprils could be quite cold again, with winds coming in from like a northeasterly direction. It's a relatively dry signal, both for March and for April. They don't look particularly wet to me, but definitely quite delayed, I would have thought, with the temperature. And then reverting to a more typical type pattern for May, the westerlies start to come back, so we get high pressure then setting up to our southwest, low pressure is out to our northwest. We return to westerly winds, so we lose all that high pressure. Obviously it turns more unsettled there. We start to bring in bouts of rain from off the Atlantic, but temperatures will be becoming somewhat milder. And then finally, this is how all springs combined are looking when we have a developing and strengthening easterly QBO. So the springs combined, we tend to have blocking to our north. We tend to have below average heights, low pressure to our south. Quite easterly through March and April, as we've established, and then we revert to westerlies in May. Little bit on the dry side as well, I think, overall, with the low pressures tending to be to the west and south of us. So rather cold and dry, perhaps, the signal with these developing easterly QBO springs through the first half of the season, through March and also through April as well to some degree. And then May sort of reverts into a westerly type pattern. So it's not a continuous blocking pattern throughout the whole spring with these developing and strengthening easterly QBO springs. But overall, March and April certainly favour that direction, and then we revert to westerlies by the time we get through to May. That's how the developing / strengthening easterly QBO springs are looking. Not that many of them within the Analogues package. It looks like it's more typical for the easterly QBO to take off through the winter, actually. Less typical for that to happen through the spring. But there we go. We shall see how things pan out. Right, so that's it for the third Spring 2020 update. Now, I'm not sure if we've got a Spring update for you next week. We may pause the Spring updates next week and have a little update for you for the summer, or we might combine both the Spring and something for summer as well. Not combine them, but, you know, have two videos, one for Spring and something for summer as well. So more about that as we get towards next weekend. But that's it for the third Spring update. This video will be placed on the Spring updates, the forecast page, and there'll be a written summary going over everything that we discussed in the video, so you'll be able to come back, read back when you want, watch the video on demand whenever you would like to do that. We're going to be back later on with GWV Spring Roundup. We'll have the ECMWF Measure France of DWD Season 1 update for you later on this afternoon too, and then tonight we've got Ensembles Watch coming up. But at 40 minutes, quite a long one this one, 40 minutes, that's all for now, and thanks for watching.